Welcome to this episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast. So this series is totally new. We're inviting consultancies across medtech to come and talk to us about their specialities so we can understand how to be better medical device marketers every day. So today I'm joined by Sabera Hyderali and Guy Pascoe. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Claudia. Lovely to be here.
Before I ask you to introduce yourselves, a little bit about Purdy Pascoe. So Purdy Pascoe is a primary market research agency based in the UK and the US. They focus primarily on medical device and diagnostic, but the question is, how can they help you as medical device marketers? So Purdy Pascoe will gain insights from your stakeholders, such as healthcare professionals, patients, business managers, medical societies, and insurers, so that you can understand how to accelerate your market adoption across your entire product lifecycle. So welcome to both of you today. So Sabera, if I can start with you, if you can tell our audience a little bit more about you and what you do.
Sure, Claudia. So my name is Sabera Hyderali. I've been in a marketing research role for well over 30 years, predominantly specializing in medical devices and diagnostics, with a global slant to my experience. I've been in a number of roles over the course of my career. So I've held positions in forecasting and pricing, as well as traditional primary market research. And I would say my sweet spots are early product development, and then I do have a very strong background in communications, which I really enjoy.
I think this is really interesting for the marketing audience as well, because communications is so important. So Guy, can I hand over to you?
Yes, sure, Claudia. So I'm Guy Pascoe, one of the two founders of Purdy Pascoe. I started my career about 30 years ago as a management consultant, but fell into market research, as many of us do, about 20 years ago, and have focused in all those 20 years on the medtech and diagnostic space.
Perfect. So I have one question. So I've been in medical device marketing for a long time, but I don't think I've ever understood market research as well as I probably need to. So the first question I have is, what is primary market research and why is it so important for medical device marketers?
Sure. So primary market research fills a gap that is, I think, very distinct to the medical device market, and that is one where there is very little data. So there's, unlike the pharmaceutical market, where you have prescription data, hospital data, that doesn't really exist in the medical device field. So many companies rely on their sales reps or just the dearth of data that is out there. So it's important. It's important to talk to your customers. It's important to understand the needs of the market so that you're not missing those very important questions.
So, but if I had to ask you to find exactly what is primary market research versus general market research?
So primary market research is using techniques such as interviews and observation and surveys to get in front of customers, the stakeholders, and have discussions with them, or do online surveys to get answers to questions.
So it's speaking with the actual end
customer. It is
customers.
speaking to the actual end customer.
Okay, Guy, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's the key difference. You're going to the horse's mouth directly and really finding out the things which you perhaps don't hear from your sales reps or don't hear from whatever sources you might be using. There's a lot of secondary data out there, which has effectively been compiled, and people have done desk research and come up with all sorts of stuff, but there's nothing really beats hearing what your customers are thinking.
It's interesting, actually, because we first met, I don't know how many, a long time ago.
You were my client.
Yes, in a market research setting. And it was amazing to me. Actually, you think you know what you're going to hear. And then when you're actually in the market research setting and you're asking those questions, you often hear completely different to what you thought, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and more precisely, a lot of our clients have started off their careers in sales type roles.
Yeah.
And so they know their customers really well. They spend lots of time with customers, but the number of times we've been in the back room and someone said, wow, they never say that to me, or I've never heard them say that. And it's just that change of perspective, having a kind of objective viewpoint, keeping it anonymous, opening up, their confidence effectively to say things that they wouldn't say to their their kind of suppliers, who often are actually personal friends with them, but you don't get the same opinion.
Totally. So we see market research has always been a lot more prevalent in pharmaceuticals, in my eyes. So what is the difference between pharmaceutical market research and medical device market research, Guy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is there's lots of similarities. They're very broadly the same, but there's some really important differences as well. Too many to list here, but probably the one I'd mention particularly is with pharmaceutical products, the product is kind of the product. You can't do much to change the drug, as it were. So a lot of the research done in that area is kind of around the launch phase. It's testing claims, testing messages, testing ads, even testing names. We do all of that as well. People sometimes refer to what we do as marketing research, and that is what I think of as marketing research. But we also do a lot more kind of earlier in the product life cycle, at the development phase, helping our clients work out, is there even a need for their product before they go and spend the money on developing it?
It's a really important question.
Yeah. And I think because of that, there is a certain iterative component to medical device research that may not be there in pharmaceutical research. So you're doing market research, and the design team or the engineering team is responding to that and saying, okay, this is the next version of the product. Well, you've got to go back into market research and retest that.
Yeah. And actually, when we were speaking before this podcast, and we spoke about the different stages when you would use market research, and actually it was interesting when you were talking about pre-development or conceptualization of the device, and you can actually go to all different types of stakeholders and say, if this device did this, would you be interested, or would this solve your issues? So it really is all stages of the development for a medical device.
There's a kind of fairly common pattern to the type of research we do. Not all of it, but many, many times we'll be, first of all, talking to those customers and stakeholders and saying, what are your pain points? Where are your difficulties? What would you like to see improved? And I kind of call that the fishing trip part of the research. You're hoping they're going to say the problem that you're going to solve. Very often they don't, because those problems are just kind of baked in and they don't perceive there to be an issue or a difficulty. And then we say, okay, well, what if we offered you this? They might say, wow, that's just what I needed. And you say, well, hold on, that's kind of weird because you didn't tell me you needed anything at all. But they didn't really realize. So you're hoping they're going to tell you that, they have this big unmet need. You're aware that they might not. I always think of the Henry Ford quote when he said, if I asked the customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse because they didn't know a car existed. We're very aware of that. At the same time, when we do show them stuff, often we're kind of revealing something which they just took for granted couldn't be improved.
Yeah. What are the different types of market research we can actually use? So, because if people are now listening to this podcast and saying, what I've just heard, actually, I think this could apply to where I am in my journey. I'm in pre-concept, something like that, or in message testing. What are the types of market research that they can actually, go and talk to a company like Purdy Pasco about? Sabira?
Mm-hmm. So there are largely two buckets of market research. There's what we call qualitative market research, which is using basically descriptive, non-numerical data. You are talking to customers, you're having discussions. The focus there is understanding the why and the how. So, and where that is really applied is understanding how behavior, the how behind behavior or the why behind behavior, the customer journey, the buying process. These are all questions that our clients have that are very well answered by qualitative market research. And then you have quantitative market research, which is more about validating and looking at patterns and understanding correlations. And it is there's rigor behind it because very often that research is sizing the market, sizing the opportunity, perhaps pricing, and you want a robust sample and you want it, validated through surveys.
So can you give me an example of when each of those views, so the qualitative is very open question driven. So in the sense you're testing a hypothesis, you think this is the way it is, but actually you want a certain number of people to actually validate that for you.
Yeah, I find often when we talk to clients and we try to uncover what they really want, it's just listening to the words they're using. If they're saying we're identifying, we're assessing, we want to know what people feel, we want to understand the why, it's qualitative. Yeah. If they're measuring, they're prioritizing, pricing, all those kind of things, quantitative.
Validating. Yeah.
And sometimes they want a bit of both, of course. So that's great. We love to do a bit of qual research to find out the story. That also helps you ask better questions in the quant, as well as giving you the different aspects of the depth and the why. So qual and then quant is a great way to go if budget and timeline kind of.
But it just sort of totally depends where you are in your journey and the questions you're asking, as you say, depending on which type you're going to use.
Yeah.
Okay. So looking back at the product development life cycle, so where are the common places that you see you're doing most market research at the moment when it comes to medical device?
I'd say we start at the very beginning, where a concept is being developed and you have a hypothesis and, you don't have a fully formed idea of what that concept looks like. You may have certain ideas and you want to go out and you want to speak to your customers. And the way that we like to think about getting answers to those questions is not necessarily testing the product, but asking customers, what is it that you're trying to achieve? There's a really important distinction there, because ultimately for a product to sustain, it's got to meet a need instead of just, testing a product. So I would say that early product development, and then as you have an idea of what your product looks like, you then need to validate that. So again, a really important place for market research to do more of a, I would say, comprehensive piece of research that is going to validate those hypotheses.
I think one common trap that we see clients potentially falling into is the R&D trap, where people are developing things because they can be done, not because anyone wants them or needs them.
It's interesting, actually, because one thing we talk a lot about in marketing is you have to solve a problem. What is the problem you're solving? And actually, it sounds like from what we're talking about now, really you need to get involved very much at the early stages, when it is at the concept stage, before it's really gone through anything, to find out, are you actually solving a real world problem that people have? Or is it something that you're doing because you can?
Yeah, and it's something that, I think we both of us would say we learned early in our careers, is that sometimes when you're starting off in market research, you're very nervous to bring negative answers to your clients and say, do you know what, they hate your idea. And it's a very scary thing to do. But when you realize, when you see the look on their face of sometimes relief, like, I never want to do this anyway, it can be a really positive story. We've just saved you thousands, millions of dollars in R&D potentially.
And it's really exciting because whichever way you go, you have an answer. So either I need to change it or either I'm on the right path. So whichever way, it gives you fuel in a direction.
Yeah. And it's also important not to stop there, right? So you commercialize your product, you've got to follow your customers. You've got to understand whether that product is meeting up to their expectations, hopefully exceeding their expectations. So understanding that level of, customer satisfaction is important too. So
at all stages of the life cycle.
That's another place.
Yeah. So in the next episode, we're going to go more into depth into the entire product life cycle, and actually where we can see market research, or where market research fits in. So how, as medical device marketers, we should really be looking at engaging market research and where it can add value to us. But so the next section I'd like to do is just ask you a few quick fire questions. And I think these are questions that you get asked quite a lot. So I thought this would be really good to add them onto the podcast, just so that everybody who's listening has these answers now and knows what they are. So the first one is, and this is probably, it depends, but I'll ask you, what is the average length of a market research project, Sabira?
So it depends. It really does vary. I would say on average, if you're looking at one country, you're doing more of a qualitative type of research engagement, you're probably looking at maybe 10 to 12 weeks. You need to leave time to find the stakeholders. That is probably where the bulk of the time is spent.
And how many people would you have included in that type of qualitative research?
Generally, the sweet spot for a single stakeholder, the magic number is around 22. Over and above that, you start to see results that are the same. There's very little return.
And is that per country?
I would say that's per country. And again, it can depend, right? Yeah. There are countries where you may not be able to reach 22 of a particular stakeholder. So, we're talking general physicians, surgeons, patients, healthcare decision makers, yes, the numbers are bigger. But then if you talk about biomed, IT, the numbers get smaller.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
and you can do research with a small number, of course, but
Yeah.
if you do a really small number, especially if you get someone who's very eloquent, very charismatic, maybe in a live situation where there's people watching, it's so easy to think that's the answer. And it's only when you've done a few more interviews down the line, maybe in a few different countries, a few different stakeholders, you look back and go, actually, that guy was an outlier.
Yeah. And so what would be the minimum number you would say? So 22 tends to be the sweet spot by stakeholder, by country. What would you say is the minimum number you can do to actually make sense in a qualitative study?
I would say maybe 8. Yeah. And again, we have clients whose budgets don't permit that. And so, we do ends at 5, and you have to take it with a grain of salt. And a big
Sometimes
grain
it's
of
just,
salt.
let's get a little voice from purchasing or something, and you get a little voice and you just say, okay, well, that's what one or two people said. It's better than nothing, but just be aware.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because actually, when you start talking about how long a market research study is going to take, and then you start looking at all the elements. So not only is it stakeholders, you've got 22 stakeholders by country, but then also you've got loads of stakeholders in that country as well. So that then multiplies those up. But I think the important thing about that from a marketing perspective is you've got to understand the problem you solve for each and every stakeholder, because that's how you're going to move through your sales cycle as quickly as possible and your adoption curve as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And in medical devices, there is a price sensitivity dynamic that is very prevalent that I know anybody listening to this will relate to. So when you talk about stakeholders, you've got to understand the dynamics between, the buying power between, for instance, an academic hospital and a university hospital, or a public setting and a private setting, or a private office and a group practice.
Yeah, especially in medtech, because it feels like a lot of what we do comes down to the basic fact that our clients are offering a better long-term result and saving money down the line for probably some more money up front. That's the sort of promise of so much of what we do. And, it's not difficult to look at the long-term result and go, that's definitely worth it. But it's quite difficult to find someone who's willing and understands that benefit to pay that extra money up front for it.
Yeah. And it's also understanding the challenges that the healthcare system you're talking to at the moment has, and each stakeholder has. So it's not just, actually, this is great, it'll save you money down the line. This is probably a whole other conversation. It's not great that it just saves you money, but is it actually addressing an issue that your stakeholder has at this point? Because if it doesn't, it's not a priority.
Yes.
Infection, reducing hospital time, those are key metrics. And, those can go a long way.
Ones that they can control, and then the ones that they can't control, which are more environmental regulation, which they're still privy to.
It's interesting. So this is, again, an it depends question. After our last answer, it's definitely an it depends question. To give a scale of how much does market research cost? So again, if somebody on this podcast is thinking, yes, I see the value, it's obvious to see the value, but I really see the value, I want to introduce this to my company, how much on average is a market research study going to take? So for example, if we look at like quantitative, which I assume is a lower value to something like qualitative because you don't have that in-person collaboration necessarily or questioning, what would you say is the range that people would expect from market research?
That's the $64,000 question. And the answer is about 64,000. No, it's not. The answer is actually, you raise a good point. So quantitative, each interaction is much cheaper.
Yeah.
But you're doing many more interactions because, getting someone to do a 10-minute survey or a 50-minute survey is much cheaper than talking to them for an hour where, obviously it takes longer. You've got a moderator to pay, all those kind of considerations. But again, you might be talking to 15 or 20 people qualitatively and 150 people quantitatively. I mean, plucking numbers out of the air. So in terms of, if you had a market research budget of $100, I would think roughly you're probably going to want to spend 50 on qual and 50 on quant, the way things work out, just, depending on your objectives, of course. As far as how much a study costs, I mean, again, it depends. It can cost anything you want. I would always say, any market research is better than no market research. There are things you can do in-house. You don't necessarily always have to use an agency. We're happy to kind of advise people on kind of how to do things if on a shoestring budget. So yeah, it's really difficult to put a number on it, but it could be anything from, buying an off-the-shelf report with caveats for sort of, $2,000 to spending $200,000 on an all singing, all dancing,
All stakeholders, all geographies.
Then
Yeah.
it depends how many markets you're doing and the rest of it. So it is difficult to tell. But I would say there's, whatever budget you have, there's something you could be doing with it. And we're happy to kind of, we always advise people, even if it's not the kind of thing that we can.
Yeah. And it's just understanding all the different factors in it, which we've gone through before about what affects the cost of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that sort of brings me on. You did say there were some cheaper areas or cheaper things you can do to start off with. One thing that sort of I would probably think if I was listening to this podcast as well is, why can't I just ask my sales team? Because, my sales team, so we work with sales teams an awful lot because they know the customer really, really well from a marketing perspective, in the sense what questions they get asked. But what are the challenges you see with companies using their marketing teams for market research?
So I think the first one is that, a sales rep has a certain mandate, right? So they, first of all, they're going in with biases because they're going in as they have a sales target to hit. So there is a certain way that they think about their product, and in listening to a customer's feedback, it's a very narrow conversation because they're only hearing what they perhaps want to hear, correct? The other thing is that their market is their customers. So they are not privy to the wider market, and that therein lies the value of market research. I think it's important to talk to sales reps, as you should talk to, you can talk to customers yourselves at conferences, but you're not getting that unbiased view that market research gives you. So I think that's a huge value.
Yeah, I would always say, of course, you should talk to your sales reps. It's insane not to. They've got these incredibly deep relationships. We know we work in plenty of areas where a surgeon won't do a procedure without the rep there, and they're scrubbed up and they're helping. It's an insanely close relationship. But for exactly that same reason, it can be. I think it serves you well to augment it with a kind of impartial point of view as well.
And that probably actually comes back to when I said earlier, when we met originally, when we were doing market research then, actually the things I heard were totally different to what I thought.
We have so many examples of sales reps being in the back room and listening to market research and saying, my customers never said that to me.
And of course they wouldn't, because they like you as well. And it is a relationship, as you say. So that is a huge benefit to actually doing unbiased market research in general, to make it unbiased. So one thing that's on the rise significantly at the moment is AI. So AI has access to a huge amount of information on the internet, a huge amount of information in other areas apart from the internet. Why, or is it a good idea for companies to say, do you know, I'm gonna go ask a chatbot?
It depends. I can't keep saying that. I mean, AI is not new in the market research industry. We've been using it for quite a while, and we are continuing to kind of harness its capabilities. I think it can offer a lot for the way we do things to actually streamline things, save our clients money, save us and our clients time. There's lots of exciting tools out there.
In what can I ask you, like, examples?
For example, so we use AI to do coding of open-ended questions. So if we do an online survey, we'll very often use open-ended questions as well. So you can still get some of that qualitative essence. And if you're just doing a survey with 100 people, it doesn't take that long to code them yourself. Coding just means turning them into quantitative data effectively. But I've got one coming up with general population, for example, which has got, I think, 5,000 people or something. You ask 3 open-ended questions. So we can get that done by AI. Unfortunately, when AI has a first go at it, it's terrible. But if I teach it and spend a few hours doing some of that manually, it gets better and better. And then I can just look through the rest and go, yeah, okay, we're still going to check everything. But that's a classic example of AI. We're using it potentially already to do transcripts of our clients want transcripts. We used to have to
use
pay
it for that
those.
a lot, actually. It's
exactly.
very good.
We'd have to pay someone quite a lot of money, and we kind of think, well, I'm not sure we're getting good value. But now we can get a pretty decent transcript pretty much for free, and that's a no-brainer. Your original question, though, which is kind of, could we why don't I just stuff it all into ChatGPT or similar? Well, number one, be very careful where you're sharing your data. But number two, it's kind of, it does need that effort, like that coding example. You've got to really direct it and make sure it's, garbage in, garbage out is a very easy phrase to use.
It's so true though, as we find, because we also use AI here at Podimos, but it's more to support us in our internal processes. So things like, anybody who's listening and who's been on calls with us will know we record all our calls using AI, and then it provides us with transcripts of the calls. And it means that we can really focus on the calls versus having to write loads of notes, and we probably won't be as efficient at it anyway. So, but we also see one thing we know is if you don't have the experience to understand what right and wrong and exceptional looks like, you'll never get it from AI because you don't know what it should look like.
Absolutely.
So you have to have the experience up front to then be able to get the right outcomes at the end by working with it on an ongoing basis.
But also layering things that AI is not going to inform.
Yeah.
For instance, the tone of the conversation, right? Or some of the nuances. So that's where the human element comes in. But yes, it does lead to an efficiency, which frees us up to spend more time on those more, what I would call executive functions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's no real ways that you're using AI to actually gain insights about qualitative and quantitative research, in the sense you still have to actually send out all those surveys?
Yeah, there are so many new tools. We're evaluating new things every week. There is something we started using, going back to those open-ended responses I mentioned. Yeah. We can now get respondents to do those on audio or even video. So imagine you're doing the survey on your laptop, and then an open-ended question comes up. Let's say you gave something a rating score, and the next question is, why did you give it that score? You don't have to. Normally you would just type in your answer. You can hit a button and either video record or audio record yourself. And we can actually get sentiment analysis from that says, but that's normally, it's sort of more applicable probably in a consumer type setting where you might expect people to be shocked, amazed, appalled, scared, whatever. Our interviews are kind of a bit more scientific and factual. You're not going to get that much interesting, unless it's kind of like someone laughing at your product because it's such a terrible idea, which you'd probably get from the words they type anyway, because doctors are pretty frank about stuff and they don't like it. Especially in an anonymous setting.
So that's sort of adding to the online qualitative research, but actually it still does never take away you sitting in front of interviewing somebody and actually then asking all those follow-up questions, because you're going to get so much more information from it.
That's a skill which I think will be around for a while.
Yeah, well, I've seen it in action. So excellent. Okay, so on to trends. So what trends are you seeing in market research from a medical device marketing perspective, Spira?
So we were speaking about AI earlier, and ironically, AI is a huge trend in medical device. Diagnostics, decision-making software, even wearables, apps. I mean, it's everywhere.
And so these are things that you're doing a lot of surveys on at the moment to see the credibility of
hospitals. Doctors are looking for ways to provide better clinical outcomes, to improve workflow, efficiencies in the hospital, and AI has a huge role in that. Sustainability is a big topic. It's a big topic in the US. It's an even bigger topic in Europe. So we're doing a lot of work in sustainability, and that's all about companies seeking to become better partners with hospitals and improving their brand equity and their brand presence, but just doing good in addition to putting product out. Patient centricity. So historically, MedTech has been very clinician focused. And I think there's been a growing recognition that patients are becoming more autonomous and taking control over their health. And so they really need to be talking to patients and understanding.
And when you say talking to patients, do you mean from a perspective of when you're actually marketing to them? Or do you mean from a reimbursement standpoint that actually when you're developing a device, you've got to make sure that the patients are engaged with this device?
Both, as well as keeping the needs of the patient in mind.
Guy, anything else?
One other trend, we talked about AI. Before AI, of course, there was big data, which is kind of the same thing to an extent. But we've done a number of projects recently exploring the power of big data in clinical terms, so real world evidence. Randomized controlled trials, as your listeners will know, are incredibly expensive and difficult and very selective by definition. And I think the amount of data that's out there now, with the ability to kind of mine that data using probably AI tools, there's a lot of a sort of rich seam of different types of evidence out there, and people are still trying to make sense of how to evaluate that, how to compare it with the RCT data.
Where are you getting this data from? So examples.
It could be billing data, it could be EMR type data, so many sources of information, there's so much information out there that potentially you got access to tens of thousands of patients rather than a couple of hundred, for example. And I think if you could harness that in a convincing way, remove bias, look at those hard to find subgroups, that kind of thing, there's a huge amount of potential.
And sort of outcomes, what sort of outcomes would you get from that data?
A classic one we hear is, this trial of 200 people, the randomized controlled trial, looks like it's statistically powered, but how many diabetics are in that sample? For example, it might be a handful, it could be 20 or 30. If I can look at 10,000 cases, suddenly I might have 3,000 diabetics who've had that stent, whatever the treatment was. I can really look at those subgroups and with way more power than I could done from the RCT. So that's just one example that I think people are starting to think about.
And so, but that would be the data you would get is more health outcome data. So it'd be more like health economic, looking at things like that.
Could be both. In fact, it could be outcomes, but it could be stay in hospital, economic story as well.
Yeah, which is actually crossing over a touch with market access.
Yes.
Which is why I then asked that, because I was like, are you looking at almost the same information as what market access are?
So to be clear, we're not really doing that kind of research ourselves, but we're researching on behalf of our clients as to how evidence is used, how it's perceived, that kind of thing. We're not offering real world evidence ourselves.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you both for being on this episode, and I look forward to our next episode. So I hope everybody has enjoyed this episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast, understanding a little bit more about what market research can do for us as medical device marketers and how it can help us do our jobs better a little bit more each day. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode.